Hamilton. I'm the retirement boot camp drill sergeant, as I like to call myself. This is our, I don't know what number wine around the world session, but I think we've been doing it for at least 3/4, if not longer, of the year. So happy to have Steve back. And Steve, I'll just echo our thanks to you for donating that wine for the event tomorrow night. It's very generous of you.
Pleasure.
Amazing.
I'd like to very quickly put a plug in for 2 events that one you may have already signed up for, or you probably did. We're bringing back bingo, but just once a month, and it's online, and it's next Tuesday at 4 p.m. There's no charge to play. If you've already played bingo once with us, you are on the list, but if you would like to be on the list, just send me an email at chamilton@lplks.org. and I will set you up so that you can play. We're encouraging costumes and masks, and we will have a prize for best costume at bingo. And then on Thursday of next week, which is the 28th, we are having our first installment of a series we're calling Gray Anatomy, where we're going to invite medical professionals in once a month to talk about a certain body part, we say, or body function, and what is normal and what is not normal as we age. And so next week, we're starting with Dr. Eric Herter, who will be talking about the brain and memory, what's normal and what's not. And that's also at 4 p.m. on Zoom. There are 80 people signed up for that sucker, 80 people so far. We are beyond thrilled about that. So just kind of let you know how much we're all concerned about our memories these days, I guess. So anyway, join us for that if you haven't already signed up. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Wilson, who is going to be talking about a wine region that he just visited. So it's all very fresh in his mind, and he's enthusiastic. And with that, Steve, take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. I appreciate you tuning in. Today we're going to talk about California's Central Coast. So a very large wine region. It's about 6, I think, counties. I wish I had a visual to throw up there, but if you can kind of imagine just a little bit south of San Francisco, really there's a growing region. It's very small, but literally you can see the Golden Gate from where this is. But if you imagine a little bit south of San Francisco, all the way down to southern Santa Barbara County. So I guess let me back up. So in wine regions, particularly California has most of the what are called American viticultural areas, AVAs. So an AVA is a region where the wine is unique, and they're sort of like Russian nesting dolls. In the case of the Central Coast, I want to say there are about 22, 23 sub AVAs within the large Central Coast. So between, again, southern San Francisco and southern Santa Barbara County, there are 20 some subregions. And the reason I chose this region this time is that the Central Coast is, I think, probably best positioned to kind of take the California wine industry in the future. And here's my reasoning. California is becoming increasingly more expensive to produce wine. The areas that we're most familiar with, Napa, Sonoma, the cost of producing wine there is really high. In fact, in 2019, just to give you an example, if you were buying grapes, let's say you don't own any land, but you buy grapes, and plenty of people do, they have growing contracts. If you were buying grapes and you didn't have a contract, so you would be buying what's called on the spot market. So you'd be basically going to the store and buying grapes off the shelf. The going rate for a ton of grapes from Napa Valley, from the valley floor, which is actually the least expensive, was about $8,000 a ton. And that's a lot relative to the Central Coast, where let's say you're making Pinot Noir, that might cost you $2,500 a ton. So the equation is vastly different if you just go past the Bay Area further south. And the reason I think that this is really a prominent, I mean, will be a more prominent region, is land is still relatively inexpensive. Land is very diverse, and we're going to taste two wines that really are almost polar opposites in style. And you're seeing a lot of, because the cost of doing business in Napa is so high, you're seeing a lot of young winemakers move to the Central Coast. So I think we're going to see more and more stuff coming out of this region, simply because you have talent, you have low land costs, you have a diversity of fruit and growing regions. I mean, they grow a far greater range of grapes than they do, say, in Napa and Sonoma, and it's simply because they can. But I think the Central Coast is going to be a fairly significant region going forward, and so I thought this would be a good opportunity to take a look at that. So the first wine that we're going to taste is the white. California Chardonnay is it's sort of developed a reputation that maybe deserved, maybe undeserved. It's developed a reputation for being kind of overdone, lots of oak, kind of boozy, maybe sweet, and the style has become kind of homogenized. And the reality is that is true. That style has become a dominant style. I mean, if you say California Chardonnay in a wine shop, they know exactly what you're saying. It's oaky, buttery, rich, full-bodied, almost drinks like whole milk or whipping cream. The reality is California has the ability to do some really cool things, and that style is just one of the styles that they can do. So in the Central Coast, you've got usually toward, trying to think of it in my mind, further north you find more mountainous regions, or rather foothill regions, areas that are close to cool bodies of water, areas that are moderated by cool weather blowing off mountains, things like that. And typically there you find Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Those are both cool climate grapes. As you go further south, it gets a little warmer, but it doesn't have to. And that's kind of one of the unique things. I mean, you'll have regions, but grapes are very sensitive to their environment. So certain grapes like warm climates, certain grapes like cool climates. And in the Central Coast, you have all of the above in every way. So this first wine, it's a Chardonnay. It is made by a winemaker, a very famous winemaker named Greg Brewer. And Greg, sort of a weird way into wine. He was, I think in the early 90s, 91 or 2, he was a lecturer at UC Santa Barbara in French, in the French department. And today, I'm sure he still speaks French, but today he's definitely known as one of the premier winemakers in the Central Coast. He's always kind of focused on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which are both, again, cool climate grapes. His main project, he works with, Greg Brewer works with a guy named Steve Clifton, and they have a winery that actually have two wineries, one called Brewer Clifton and the other one called Melville. And they make very classic styles of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. A number of years back, Greg separately decided he wanted to kind of do a wine that was very broken down, like very elemental. And he found a vineyard. It's about 20 years old. Actually, he found several vineyards, but in this case, one vineyard about 20 years old that sits in a I think it's about 2,000 feet above sea level, so fairly cool. And it sits in an old, basically an old marine bed. There's diatomaceous earth, is earth created by decomposed sea creatures, broken down silica. It's very fine. It's very powdery. Grapes love drainage. That's pretty much the most important thing for wine grapes. They like to have the soil well drained, and this does very well. So the grapes are at fairly high elevation. Drainage means that they get water, but they sort of have to fight for it. They have to struggle a little bit. And the vines just do so well here. And in fact, they do so well that Greg is able to harvest. Typically, I mean, I was out in California several weeks back, and most of the Chardonnay had already been brought in, was in tank, it was fermenting, it was on its way toward becoming wine. The grapes for Diatom, and this is kind of this is from one particular vineyard, but they've got several single block Diatom wines, so even a subset of this wine. The fruit for the Diatom wines is still on the vine right now, and it will probably be there for another couple weeks. They're not racing to get it harvested, and it's because this area is cool. I would say it's probably, the weather is sort of like today. It's pleasant, but not super warm. And then at night it gets almost cold, down to the low 50s. So the grapes come out and ripen for a few hours during the day, and then they go back in the fridge. And this process keeps repeating itself. And what you end up with are grapes that spend an extensive period of time ripening and developing flavor, but they're not over ripening because of the temperature. So this wine is it's 100% Chardonnay. It grows in a vineyard that looks like you're almost like walking in chalk. You have to clean off your shoes just to step out of your car, because it's very, very, I mean, it's like talcum powder. And this wine sees, so the grapes are harvested after an extended growing season. It sees no oak. Greg Bird kind of wants the wine to speak for itself. And so he does not oak it at all. It does spend time with they're called lees, the dead yeast cells. So after the yeast dies during fermentation, they'll let the lees sit in the tank, and it develops it softens the wine a little bit, broadens the flavor palette. But yeah, this wine is, I mean, it doesn't smell of oak. It smells of tree fruit, apple and pear, maybe sweet almond. It has almost a kind of a wet stone note to it, but this is a very stripped down kind of, this is what Chardonnay looks like when it's naked kind of thing. Not a lot of producers are doing it, but not a lot of producers can do it. It's, if you left a lot of the Chardonnay in most of the vineyards in California this long, it would just be all sugar. There would be no acid left. It would make a very boozy, it would not sell as a fine wine, more than likely. So yeah, let's taste this wine. Give it a little swirl.
And I'll just remind people at this point, if you have tasting notes that you want to share, just go ahead and put it in the chat. If you're tasting those leaves, the yeast, anything else, citrus, whatever, don't be shy to put them in the chat. We have had 2 questions come up, Steve. Is this a good time to ask?
Absolutely.
More in general, but not, as to the taste of the wine. But Jeff wants to know, how have the California fires impacted current and future wine production in this region?
In this particular region, not as much. There were some, a recollection, there were some isolated fires in the Central Coast. They had some greater issues in 18 or no 19. They had greater issues in 19. I would say probably fire. What's impacting most right now is drought. Fire is, it's sort of the damage of fire. I mean, like, for example, in 2020, not a lot of people are going to make wine. We're not going to see a ton of Napa Valley Cabernet from 2020. Santa Barbara, Central Coast rather, being further south and different wind. I mean, it usually, if the fire's not there, the winds can damage the fruit as well by bringing the smoke. But Central Coast was isolated enough. I think it was okay. I've not noticed. I mean, there have been previous years where you smell the wine and it smells like you poured water on a campfire. I mean, you can smell the wildfire in the wine. I not from the Central Coast, I've not noticed that too much. But I think probably what the fires did for wine, it was sort of a double-edged sword. On one hand, there were producers who made no wine. Their fruit was not of good enough quality to produce wine. However, there was a lot of wine on the bulk market. So high-end wineries may make, let's say, for argument's sake, a winery makes a wine that has, they want to keep it at 1,000 cases of wine. Well, they might have 2,000 cases worth of grapes. So they might hold that wine and use it themselves, or they might sell it off. And there were several, 18 and 19 were fairly prolific harvests. So there was a lot of juice in tank that was in the bulk market. And when the fires broke out, a lot of people, knowing that they weren't going to make wine themselves, were buying juice on the bulk market. So on one hand, we had the issue of fire. On the other hand, we cleaned up all of the bulk juice. So you don't, for price stabilization, you don't really want a ton of unclaimed wine in the market at any given time. There are some buying opportunities, but for the most part, it doesn't benefit the entire industry uniformly. So I would say going forward, yeah, the drought is the biggest issue. From what I experienced, I think 2021 is going to be at least with, say, Napa and Sonoma, is going to be a very good vintage, just very small, just really small.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question from Gloria St. John. Hi, Gloria, wave your hand. There she is. She moved to Lawrence to retire after having lived in California for a long time. She says she knew people who grew grapes and those who only bought grapes and then made wine of any combination of the two. So she wonders, in your opinion, which is most important to the final product, the grower or the winemaker?
So I guess I would say there's, and I'm glad I'm not, I guess I can give maybe a more honest statement because I'm not a winemaker. A winemaker, there's an adage that says fine wine is made on the vine. So there is a belief that wine is made in the vineyard. And I would say that it's probably 60 to 70% is made in the vineyard. There really is. If nature, in my opinion, if nature can do the work It can do it better than humans can. Correcting wine, adjusting wine is harder to do. It's nature pulls it off better. That said, if you are a winemaker and you have a grower that you work with, more often than not, the winemaker will actually work pretty heavily with the grower. They will say, listen, we want, they will define how the vineyard is to be managed, how much fruit comes off those vines, because in winemaking, you don't really want to encourage the vines to produce as much as they might want to. You want to curtail that yield. If you think, I mean, it kind of makes sense if you think about it. Each vine has a finite amount of energy, and if that energy goes into, say, 4 clusters versus 8, those 4 clusters are going to be better than the diluted 8. And so, oftentimes, winemakers will actually work with growers pretty extensively. But no, I mean, if you're buying fruit from a region where, again, nature is doing most of the work, you can make some pretty good wine. I mean, winemakers still have plenty of opportunities to ruin the wine. And it's funny, I've had wines from really noted vineyards that were just not good. And the only reason that it wasn't good was the winemaking. Something happened in the winery that was different from other people using the same fruit from the same vineyard. But yeah, so I guess I would say in most cases, winemakers will try to know that they want to know the growers, they want to know how they manage their vineyards. They may even dictate specific protocols for growing the grapes, but yeah, growing grapes and making wine are really 2 different skill sets. And if I were doing it, I would definitely want the person growing grapes to be a specialist at growing grapes.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Yeah, she says thank you. Why don't we, if anybody has any comments about this wine before we move on to the red, and you want to just unmute yourself, I don't think we have to keep this as formal as making you chat. I mean, type into the chat if you want to say something about the wine itself. Feel free.
I guess I would say, oh,
go ahead. No, I was just saying, kind of like we're actually standing in a wine store doing a sampling, but not really.
Yeah. I guess I would say one thing I really do love about this wine. It has a weird sense of energy. When you put it in the mouth, I mean, you taste kind of the apple and pear and quince and pineapple and, I mean, tree fruits, little bit of tropical, but then this bright acid just pops. I mean, it kind of prickles on your tongue. And the fact that this wine was able to achieve such a great ripeness, as well as retaining a ton of acidity, I love it. I will say, yeah, I think trout was, Kathy was having trout on the menu. This would be an awesome food wine for anything out of the water. And actually, it's kind of funny. This has such a nice acidity. I would say, even something like fried chicken would be.
I was going to say that. I was going to say a nice buttery roasted chicken in the oven.
Yeah,
you know, like the old-fashioned kind.
Salty, fatty, just delicious. This acid just cuts right through that and gets you ready for the next bite. Yeah. I mean, yeah, chicken's like, who used to do it? LBC used to do chicharrones, like fried chicken skin. That's what I would love with this.
So I'm assuming that I'm assuming that idea would translate to Thanksgiving then, the traditional.
Oh yeah, yes.
Turkey, stuffing, gravy, buttery
Absolutely.
rolls. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. No, it needs, I mean, this is a great wine just because it leaves your mouth almost watering. I mean, and that's when you're having kind of rich fatty food, you want something to kind of move the fat off your tongue, and this acidity. Yeah, I really dig this wine.
And keep in mind, Thanksgiving is next month. Can
Mhm.
you believe it? Can you believe it? Okay, Maureen and Jack Altman say, I think the acidity is what I like the most. It almost tasted effervescent at
Yeah,
first sip. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, and that's, I mean, there's no bubbles in it. It's just, it has an electricity almost. And uh it's a wine. It's funny. Greg Brewer, the winemaker, kind of when you talk to him, he's bouncing off the wall. I mean, that I think he just lives on Red Bull, because he's always going, like, you at 6 a.m. he's checking tanks. But he would, that's kind of what he was going for with this wine. He wanted it to be, oak is delicious. I mean, it serves its purpose, but sometimes oak is like, I don't know, maybe like black pepper. A little does something, and then a lot changes it. Sometimes you lose some of the finesse, and this wine just retains kind of that energy, that electricity. And it's, I mean, it's cool. It's rooted in an ancient, ancient seabed is where this vine is being fed, and you can almost kind of taste that minerality in the wine. I really, this is cool. I like this wine.
Yeah, well, that segues well. And Maureen, I see you, but the Smith said it's very good.
It's okay.
Why is oaked wine? Why does it seem so popular? And I remember when people got into wine, I'm thinking it might have been 20 years ago or so that we started, pretending like we knew something about wine. And you go to a restaurant and you'd order a Chardonnay and they'd say, well, do you want oaked or unoaked? And that was kind of, it wasn't like what kind of Chardonnay, it's just oaked or unoaked. And that's, I guess oaked was far more popular. Why is that?
It probably could be traced back, honestly, to Jess Jackson at Kendall Jackson. KJ kind of defined its style. They wanted their oak to be almost in your face. Now, I will say, oak and Chardonnay, if you go to the region of Burgundy, where in France, where Chardonnay was born, they use oak barrels. They don't use, what they would want to do is they would want to take the wood for the barrel and probably cure it for 3 or 4 or 5 years outside. They'd want it to be rained on, and all of the kind of the harsh, overt flavors would get kind of leached out.
Not too much.
They American oak was the American approach to it was more, if some is good, more is better, I think. And it got to the point, in the 90s, there was actually a rejection. There were restaurants who would print menus, that their whites would be on this list called ABC, anything but Chardonnay. And it was too bad, because really, white Burgundy, Chardonnay from the region of Burgundy is some of the most coveted, amazing wine there is. It at stratospheric prices. And
Yeah.
but California Chardonnay really adopted a more kind of aggressive flavor, and so they really want that to lead. And the problem is, as you can see from this wine, Chardonnay does not have an aggressive flavor when it's by itself. It's fairly elegant. It's subtle, and the heavily toasted oak really kind of makes it more dominant. And that the problem is, this wine has a lot more friends, I would say, in a restaurant than a really heavily oaky, buttery Chardonnay does. A really oaky, buttery Chardonnay, lobster and drawn butter. It needs a lot of fat and cholesterol to pair with that wine. And when you kind of break it out and get a little bit more, have the acid a little higher. Oh, I should point out. So this wine again sees no oak at all. When you put Chardonnay into a barrel, it undergoes a process, usually, unless they take drastic steps to prevent it. It undergoes a process called malolactic fermentation, and it's not sugar eating yeast fermentation. It's a chemical fermentation, but it basically the malic acid, rather, the green apple, the crunchy tart green apple acid, which this wine has a lot of, is chemically converted into lactic acid, which is the acid in milk. I mean, it seems funny, but milk actually has a lot of acid. It's just not like the acid that we think of, like citric or malic or tartaric, where it's kind of bright and kind of bites you. So when you put Chardonnay into an oak barrel, there is it's a bacteria causes this malolactic fermentation. It happens more often than not in barrels. So what happens is you take this wine that has this bright acid and kind of makes your mouth water, and you put it through malolactic fermentation, and it becomes creamy and rich. And sometimes your tongue, I mean, it's almost cloying in some ways. I mean, your tongue wants to water, but it can't, because there's not the acid that will prompt that to happen. So I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm not sure who's talking. Maureen, you were next, but I'm not sure who was just chiming in. But go ahead, Maureen.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's like liking the vanilla ice cream of ice creams, but I am one of those people, one of those dinosaurs who actually likes buttery Chardonnay. I'm assuming it's not going away anytime soon.
No. I would say that it does. There was, I mean, it's too bad that we always have to swing in pendulums, because it was, in the 90s, Chardonnay started getting oakier and butterier, and the response was, again, there were restaurants who refused to sell oaky buttery Chardonnay, and then wineries immediately followed up with unoaked Chardonnay, which, in this, I mean, unoaked Chardonnay is good, but there really is room for everybody in the field. And no, oaky, I would say that oaky buttery Chardonnay is fading a little bit. It's not going to go away, but it is there. I guess we're moving a little back, maybe more toward the center. I mean, there got to the point where, honestly, there were wines that were being made that had no grape component to it. I mean, the butter is actually a natural bacteria, called the byproduct of a bacteria called diacetyl. If you mix the chemical diacetyl with coconut oil, you have movie theater popcorn butter. I mean, that's it's very chemical. The vanilla actually, this is kind of cool. The vanilla part comes from American oak, and American white oak, which is used for wine and whiskey and a number of other things. The chemical compound that makes a tree stand up straight versus flopping over is called lignin. And as it turns out, when you cut American oak, which has a lot of lignin in it, and you toast that, it pretty much does the same thing as if you were toasting a marshmallow. The lignin actually converts into vanillin, which is the vanilla beans. Vanilla is not exclusive to the orchid. Vanilla beans just have a high concentration of lignin in them. And so when you toast an oak barrel, you can actually develop natural vanilla flavors pretty easily. And again, the butter component is again also a natural component. But what happened was it was kind of taking over the wine. Oak and butter and vanilla were becoming the leaders, and they're not going away, but I would argue that maybe we need to bring the fruit back up a little, kind of adjust the volume a little bit, turn the fruit up a little more, because when you have a wine that's just like got a little kiss of butter and a little kiss of vanilla and a ton of fruit, I mean, it's delicious. I mean, you see a lot more. It's a more kind of dynamic flavor than if you're just, I mean, there are times we'll smell wine and it honestly, it smells like when you're working in the wood shop, and it's kind of sawdust, and I mean, it's warm, slightly singed wood, and that's the dominant flavor. And I would like to see kind of wine get a little more, the grapes should be showcased, I guess I would say. But no, back to your original question. No, oaky buttery is not going anywhere.
Okay, I want to move on for those of us who are waiting for the red. Because I know some of us have the red
Yes.
ready. We don't want to
Okay.
slight the red.
No.
Let's move on, and then I have more questions, but we'll do a little lightning round at the end of this segment, as it were.
Sounds good.
And, let's go red. Thank you.
So this is a wine that I have a personal connection to. We've kind of watched this wine come to kind of mature. This project started, I want to say it was maybe 2009 or 10. Yeah, 8, 9 or 10. Anyway, a gentleman named Andrew Jones at the time was a viticultural specialist for one of the leading vineyard nurseries in California, a nursery called Sunridge Nursery. Southern, I think it's just north of LA. So Sunridge, if you're a grape grower, you would call Sunridge and say, hey, I need you to come out, look at my land. I need you to tell me what kind of, grapes to grow, the type of root stock that I need, the orientation, assess my drainage and my, my exposure and all those things. And they would say, all right, well, based on what we've assessed, you need this grape and this root stock and planted this way. And so Andrew was one of the people who would come to the vineyard and do that. And it was in the late 2010s that Andrew's like, I literally know where all the great vineyards are planted in the Central Coast because I plant them. I should go back and buy fruit from the growers that I work with. And so I want to say 2010, 2011, he had his first vintage. And we, I think, did field recordings in our wine club in maybe 2012 or so, and Fiction was one of them. But the idea behind field recordings, it's too bad. I don't know why they did away with it, because the original label was awesome. But Andrew was often in vineyards early in the morning and late at night, and they would have starlings in formation that would fly over the vineyards. And he's an amateur photographer, and he would take pictures, and he digitized this picture of starlings flying over the vineyard in formation, and that became the kind of the essence of field recordings. He's clearly hired a graphic designer who's told him otherwise, but he's now standardized his labels more to the way it looks today. But Andrew still is still working for Sunridge Nurseries, but I would say probably 40% of the time he is making wine out of Paso Robles, which is an area kind of equidistant between San Francisco and LA. He buys fruit, so he doesn't grow the grapes himself, but he knows intimately who does. And it allows him to kind of, I mean, he's been able to make some really, really cool wines. And the reason I picked this wine, aside from Andrew's awesome, I like him very much. But the reason I picked this wine is that it's kind of an example of what I think is coming out of the Central Coast. I mean, Andrew, he's not much like everybody, not as young as he once was when I first met him, but I would say he's probably now in his mid 40s, but he represents kind of that up and coming aspiring wine. I mean, he was able to, he didn't own any vineyards, he did not have a winery, and yet the Central Coast, he was able to find a facility to make the wine, and he was able to find growers to source the fruit. And those two ingredients are vital for creating the next winery. And so kind of going back to my original point, I think Central Coast, this is fertile ground for people like Andrew. I mean, he's able to work with, I mean, this is sort of, we would describe this as a kitchen sink red. So it's got, they always change. In fact, I couldn't even, like, I asked one of my suppliers who knows Andrew personally, to see whether he had ever, gotten the tech sheet on this wine. I can take some stabs at what I think is in this bottle, but he doesn't reveal the grapes that he's using. But it was the Central Coast that provided him this opportunity to make the wine. And Fiction was one of his first wines. Again, sort of a kitchen sink red. Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, Barbera. I mean, he uses grapes that many wineries don't use. So he's got a pretty wide, pretty large pantry, I guess, as it were. So it really includes a lot of stuff. But the fact that he was able to do it, and the fact that he's able to continue, I mean, he has, I want to say, maybe 24 wines now in his stable. He has a cidery. If you're ever in Paso Robles, there's kind of a cool, it's definitely a young crowd scene, but it's an area called Tin City. And Tin City is just like these little pop-ups, like, so food trucks and like nano wineries, where a winery might make several barrels of a wine and that's all they make. And, breweries and cideries, and it's just a very cool environment. I will say, I don't know of similar environments in Napa and Sonoma. There hasn't been that same type of let's collaborate on stuff. I mean, Tin City, it's kind of cool. The people that go there, and actually, I will say there's another in the Diatom comes from a town called Lompoc, which is in Santa Barbara County, and Lompoc is home to what's called the Wine Ghetto, and it's basically a warehouse district where wineries just kind of take over 1,000 square feet and we'll do a tasting room. And so you go to the Wine Ghetto, or you go to Tin City, and you just visit lots and lots of people, and they're all working together, and they're all doing the same, kind of shooting for the same goal. They all want to make great wine, and they like the synergy and the collaboration that occurs there. But Fiction again, this is one of Andrew's first wines. He has 20 some other wines today that he does. He was one of the first people to do canned wine, which was really, I mean, that was a bold move 8 years ago when nobody was doing canned wine. And he's like, I think we should make this portable. We should somebody sitting on a beach should be able to have a glass of wine and not worry about whether it's glass. And that was a kind of the younger generation saying, we like what you're doing, just do it, maybe try this approach. And nobody had thought of that before, or if they had thought of it, they hadn't acted on it. So there's a lot of really cool stuff coming out of the Central Coast. So this is Specifically about this guy, kitchen sink red, nice ripe fruit. There's You get a little bit of blueberry, which I will say again, I don't know the varietal breakdown of this wine, but there are very few grapes that show blue fruits. Petite Syrah is one of them, and so I mean, just the fact that I can smell blueberries in this wine, I would say there's a good chunk of Petite in it. But Zinfandel, Syrah, Grenache. He dabbles with some Italian varietals like Nebbiolo and Barbera, so there may be some of that in there. But the idea is this wine should be, great with pizza and burgers and pasta, as well as fancy food. It should kind of serve the masses. But I like I said, I've always liked Andrew's style. It's going to keep our industry moving along and kind of fresh. And so I really respect what he does.
Well, the Altmans agree with you. They said it's very warm and comforting, good acid, earth, stone fruit. It would be delicious with so much food, and it's good as a standalone. So what more could you want, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, the approach again, maybe of the younger generation of winemakers is, we're not all going to Michelin restaurants for dinner tonight, and what if I'm having, In-N-Out burger? What goes with that? So I think that this approach to making, again, kitchen sink reds that are versatile, but still not. I mean, there's a lot going on in this glass. I mean, there's fruit and minerals, and he did put it into an oak barrel. You can kind of smell a little bit of vanilla on the nose there. Actually, vanilla and there's another marker from American oak aside from vanilla, which is dill pickle. So if you ever smell in a wine a little bit of dill pickle, more than likely it went into American oak. But there's just a little hint of dill.
Gloria says cherry and tobacco.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I mean,
so
tons of
I
fruit
need to. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to make sure everybody gets their questions in, and Clifton wants to know: would you decant this wine? Like, if you were having people over for pizza or whatever, would you decant it, or does it need it?
I'm sort of lazy in that respect. I mean, I like glasses that will hold a lot. So if I can dirty a glass versus dirty a decanter, I'll probably just pour it in the glass and just. It's an annoying habit. We're constantly swirling beverages. I mean, it doesn't even matter whether it's wine or not. Like my glasses are constantly swirling. I mean, there are times where it's not even appropriate to do that, and it's just a habit. But I would say this one probably I would probably not. I mean, just again, it's more of a laziness thing. But I will say that chemically, wines like this where you can open it up, you have a glass, stick the cork in it, put it in your fridge. I always recommend keeping your wine after it's opened in the fridge. You don't want to have it like ice cold, but temperature definitely will hold a wine longer. But the nice thing about this wine is, I mean, tomorrow, I mean, I'll have a bottle open. Tomorrow when I pop it, it'll be a little different. The fruit will be a little deeper. Kind of the high toned notes will probably fade a little bit, but that's a nice thing. I mean, it definitely has the chemistry to be around for a couple days and to change. But yeah, I'm like I said, I'm lazy. Decanters, I love them, but
Okay.
I'm if I can use a glass, I usually do.
Okay. I want to acknowledge the Everetts because they're after my own heart here, as they are Scotch lovers. First of all, Ed and Chris say, so much is made of wine pairing with food. We tend to drink wine after we've finished dinner so that we can tease out every nuance of the wine. Wine is like good Scotch. and this gives me an idea for a Scotch tasting, Kathleen,
Mhm.
for winter. Oh my gosh. It should stand on its own merits. Your thoughts, Steve?
I would say it's a wine to wine thing. I mean, if you think about where a lot of great wines originated, I mean, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, most of those places do not drink wine. I mean, they will routinely pair it with food. Usually, I mean, why does a bottle of Chianti taste really good with a pasta with red sauce? Well, because they grew up together. That like the people in Tuscany needed something to have with their pasta and red sauce, and Sangiovese just happened to do a great job, and they kept growing it, and it stayed there. There are some wines. I mean, I would say that there are some wines that I don't even care for when they are without food. They see, I mean, I don't, maybe the example is ketchup. Ketchup by itself, maybe not the greatest thing. I've yet to like come home after a long day at work and have a glass of ketchup. But you pair it with French fries, you pair it with a burger, you pair it with other things, and it becomes the whole. And I won't say that all wines are that way. I mean, there are a lot of wines that absolutely stand on their own, but there are a lot of wines that really, I would say, don't. You're not seeing what their full potential is without food, only because those wines, I mean, a great, for example, a great Nebbiolo. So Nebbiolo is a grape that's grown up in the Piedmont region, right in the mountainous foothills of Italy. It is Barolo. It is a grape of Barolo and Barbaresco. If you have that by itself, it's good, but it's not as good as if you had it with the food of Piedmont. If you had it with some unctuous pasta, that they do a pasta up there called pline, which has it's a little purse filled with a ragu of veal, beef, and rabbit. When you pair it with the pline, it becomes a different thing. When you have truffles, like Nebbiolo loves truffles, and the forests around the forest around Piedmont are full of truffles, and so you have those things. It really does kind of complete it. But no, there are. I would say that, and this is maybe a cop out, but I would say, however you appreciate the wine the most is how you should have it. Like, if you don't care for a style of food, don't eat that style of food. Find one that you do like. If you don't care for a style of wine, however you enjoy that is I mean, that's customizing it to your palate. But I guess I would say in summation, there are some wines that don't do as well without food, and there are some that do. So it depends, but do what you gain the most enjoyment out of. That's the bottom line.
Okay. Well, we have two dangling questions that could very well be asked next month because they're sort of generic. So I think I'm going to honor everybody's time and let them go eat dinner to absorb the alcohol. So we will definitely be with you, I hope, next month for another wine region in November. I wanted to thank you, Steve, for your time, of course, and delicious wines. I tasted the red only, but the Chardonnay sounded really, really delicious. So can't wait to break into that one. Thank you again for the donation for tomorrow night's event, everybody, if you want to go. Kathleen, did you tell them the sign up procedure for that?
Yeah, I put it in the chat. It's
okay, good.
very
So that's in the
first
chat.
thing. Yeah.
Again, we'll get to I've got two outstanding questions that are sort of evergreen, so we will ask those next time. Thank you. Bravo. Very good choices.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Good happy hour, all my
Unmute
friends,
and-
everybody. And